Now, even though there is much to discuss and love when it comes to Star Wars, my favorite part has always been the Jedi-Sith dichotomy. It's always been the battle of good versus evil at the very core of it all that has captivated me, and how these two radically different philosophies approach using the Force and are basically exact opposites of each other, despite what Palpatine might tell you.
The Sith and the Jedi are similar in almost every way.
And before arguments start that Palpatine has a point here, and sure, there are some similarities between the two, it is important to keep in mind that what he is trying to do here is manipulate Anakin. He's trying to subtly poison his mind against the Jedi and open it to the ways of the Sith so that it'll be easier to turn him to the dark side and where he then can completely use him as a pawn to get what he wants. Which is what the Sith do, right? They are the epitome of selfishness. They try to use everything and anyone else around them in order to achieve, well, let's let Palpatine explain it himself. And the main reason why Palpatine says this slightly over-the-top line is that not only is he basically ruler of the galaxy at this point, but with the Jedi all but gone after Order 66, the pendulum has swung to the other side. The pendulum of power has essentially swung completely in favor of the dark side. They, the Sith, are stronger with the Force than ever before because they now stand almost unopposed. And this swing, this disruption of the balance essentially gets explained to Yoda by the Force ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn in an episode of The Clone Wars, an episode that takes place shortly before the events of Revenge of the Sith, when Yoda starts down the path of eventually becoming a Force ghost himself, or begins his training to become one, I should say.
With each day the Clone War wages, evil is growing in its power. What you felt in the cave is merely a portion of what the dark side now holds.
But even with all this power, unlimited power, there is one thing that the Sith cannot achieve, at least in George Lucas Star Wars. The sequels may try to argue otherwise. But anyway, this one thing that arguably they all seek above everything else is immortality. They want to live forever because they know oblivion awaits them after death.
There is no life after death. Only nothingness awaits you, Jedi.
And this is mostly true. Even George Lucas has brought this up before.
Well, that's, conceptually, when you get into the Force and you get into the living Force and the Uber Force, which is basically, well, however you want to call it, heaven or born again or however you want to, in terms of karma, that there is a continuum and that you join the Force when you die and you lose your personality, but you become one with this bigger living entity.
It's also known by the Jedi in-universe, and presumably the Sith as well, going back to the Clone Wars once again and what Anakin says to Yoda when he, Yoda, starts hearing the voice of the dead Qui-Gon Jinn.
Everything that we know about the Force tells us that an individual retaining their identity after death is impossible.
And this is all a particularly frightening thought to the Sith, the thought that when you're dead, you're just gone. Because when you only think of and care about yourself, as they do, when you're that self-absorbed, what do you really care what happens after you're dead and gone? What does accumulating power matter if you're eventually going to lose it all and die, which is their greatest fear? Though yes, Sith certainly do, to some or maybe varying degrees depending on the individual Sith, they do care about their legacy. We even hear a remnant of Darth Bane brag about his in the Clone Wars to Yoda, even though he too is actually just dead and gone.
I created a legacy so resilient that now you come before me.
And though we could go much, much more into this topic, I'd argue this is why the Rule of Two actually ends up working. Because though I'm sure most of the Sith that existed over the 1,000 years they were in hiding, they wanted to believe they would be the one who reigns supreme in the end, that they would be the Sith that conquers the galaxy and the Jedi. But somewhere in the back of their minds they likely knew or feared they were going to die, and they did want to leave something behind. They wanted to know their existence had led to something, that they had left some sort of mark on the galaxy that will not be forgotten, which again, in this episode of Clone Wars, Bane does seem to care about. It implies it was important to him, to say nothing of Bane's philosophy from his expanded universe trilogy of books, which would deserve an entire video devoted to it. But for better or worse, and sticking more with George Lucas Star Wars or what he said about the Sith, he almost describes the Rule of Two as being born completely out of necessity, not any sort of long-term plan, which again isn't to say they care nothing about their legacy, But by and large, Sith are in the present type beings. They live in a constant state of fear and mistrust, and the rule of two described by Lucas more or less says there can't be any more than two because they'll just end up killing each other.
When you become greedy, then you do bad things to get stuff from other people. Once you get that stuff, then you become afraid. Once you become afraid that somebody's going to take it from you, then you start striking out at people, and you get angry at things, you get worried, and that puts you in a whole psychological mindset that turns you ultimately into an evil person, where you're doing horrible things to people, thinking that you're doing the right thing, but you're doing it because you're afraid they're going to hurt you before you hurt them.
Either way, this deep-rooted fear of being forgotten, of life being maybe somewhat meaningless because it ends for you eventually, is not a fear shared by the Jedi, which isn't to say they welcome death or joining with the cosmic force and losing their identity when they die, but they know it's all part of the cycle, that they are part of something greater than the self, and knowing this, knowing their life means something, is what you could say they thrive upon. By giving and living a life for others, you have nothing to fear losing and everything to gain. The only thing that really matters to you then is the greater good. And when facing death, there is a peace of mind in knowing that you have made the galaxy a better place because you were in it. That you have helped so many other people and left a mark on it that will carry forward. They don't fear death so much because they believe their purpose was to maintain not only peace and justice for the Republic, but balance in the Force. This is also why it basically doesn't matter how many Jedi there are, why them merely existing doesn't cause any sort of imbalance or swing the pendulum too far in favor of the light, even when there are thousands of them, or roughly 10,000 during the time of the prequels. Even though, on the flip side, it only takes one Sith to potentially pull the balance out of whack and in favor of the dark side, which, to sum it up quickly, is because the Jedi are, you could say, reactive. They only use the Force for, well, knowledge and defense. They only use it to help others and to maintain the balance above all else. And when they're not needed, they only stand ready, if you will. While on the flip side, you could say the Sith use it proactively and for themselves. They again use it to get the things they want and don't care at all about how that may affect the balance of the Force. In fact, they're trying to swing things in favor of the dark side, whereas the Jedi are just trying to keep the Force balanced between the two, even though they do use the light to do this. And yes, I do think the Jedi can go too far and try to do too much, or become too much servant of the Republic, or proactive, and not enough servant of the Force, reactive, which could then swing things too far in favor of the light. This seems to be what happens in the prequel era, not enough Qui-Gon Jinn-like Jedi listening to and simply following the will of the Force, and too many listening to Palpatine and listening to the will of the Republic, and the will of a Sith in hiding. But it is important that there always be Jedi ready to safeguard the galaxy from or to destroy the Sith should they arise. So important that the Force itself, or some aspect of it, will allow certain Jedi to essentially cheat death, to achieve the very thing the Sith want the most, to exist or live forever, to come back as a Force ghost so that they can interact with the living to some extent, and maybe we'll discuss those limits in a future video. Right in the Clone Wars, and for the record, almost all these clips I'm using will come from the Season 6 Yoda arc if you're curious or should want to check it out, which I highly recommend doing because there is a great amount of lore to be had in those episodes. But anyway, right in the Clone Wars, Qui-Gon Jinn tells this to Yoda.
You have been chosen, as I was before you.
For what chosen am I?
Dark times are ahead, and forces of light must remain. This is the path of only a few Jedi.
Later on then, after encountering a strange Force priestess on a planet that is the origin of the midichlorians and thus all life in the galaxy, Yoda is told this.
But why him?
He is to teach one that will save the universe from a great imbalance. For this, the great gift will be his.
In other words, Yoda is being given the great gift. He's being allowed to keep his consciousness after death, in order to come back and see to it that Luke is eventually trained as a Jedi so that the Sith are ultimately defeated. That is how important the Jedi are to the Force itself and the galaxy, that what amounts to a rule of existence, you could even say, can be broken by them so that their light, hopefully, never fades entirely from the galaxy. But this is not an easy gift to achieve. The ability to become more powerful than you can possibly imagine, which I think outweighs unlimited power, can only be accomplished by becoming the very antithesis of the Sith. Not that the Jedi aren't pretty much that already, but they have to take it even further. They have to be proven to be worthy or committed to the greater good by letting go of any and all forms of attachment. They have to face and acknowledge their own dark side within. They have to confront their own hubris, which even Yoda struggles with at first during his training with the Force Priestess.
What you faced was a reflection of your hubris in the shadow of your soul.
And yet, clear I thought I was.
He had to come to recognize and acknowledge his own dark side within him, that it had not and could not ever be truly defeated, that it would forever be a part of him.
But power over me you have not. Through patience and training, it is I who control you.
And this, of course, all leads to arguably the greatest irony in Star Wars, that the thing the Sith want the most, to get all the power and to live forever and achieve a lasting legacy, is virtually impossible for them, that it can only be achieved by doing the exact opposite of what they're doing, that only the Jedi are meant or destined by the Force itself to endure for all time. Unlimited power cannot grant them immortality, and the more power they seek, the more selfish they become, and the more they embrace the darkness within them, the further from their ultimate goal they actually become. Well, that's all I've got for this time, and as you can probably tell by my voice, I am a little under the weather. This video was originally going to be a much more comprehensive look at Force Ghosts, about everything they are and can do, and so on and so forth. So I decided to at least get one part done and then maybe continue this in another video, assuming people would like me to go into that. Either way, leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.